Welcome to Coffee and Conversations, mini episodes by victims and villains. I am your co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
And I am Abigail Bardwell.
Yes, Abigail is a relatively new voice to our platform on both writing and podcasting side. She's been a guest on a couple of our previous episodes. Most notably, her story of her sister's suicide and how it impacted her. That episode is called The Bardwell Sisters. And I just suggest you guys check that one out because it is one of the heaviest hitting episodes I think Victims and Villains has ever released. And it's one of the most proud as a podcaster I've been. So please go check that out. Yes. We're talking about the movie Donna, Stronger Than Pretty today, and we're going to go ahead, and this episode is going to be a little bit interesting because we're going to basically kind of do the review portion of this episode right up front, and then just jump right into the thematic elements of this. Donna, Stronger Than Pretty tells the story of Donna, a woman that falls in love with a man who eventually she marries and has kids with, and finds herself actually in a cycle of domestic violence, and it's basically her story of overcoming those circumstances and resetting her life and becoming a school teacher, which was her lifelong dream. We'll provide links in the descriptions below where you guys can find the movie. But Abigail, what did you think of this movie?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I overall thought it was a very touching movie. I related a lot to the story, both with personal experience and observance. I thought the way they captured so many elements of it was very smart. The intergenerational trauma, between going with like the theme of the movie and then also the way that they captured it with the timeline of going through, so many years. It started what, in like the late 60s, I believe, and then all the way, through the 90s. So I thought that was very beautifully done. What about you? What did you think of it?
I really enjoyed this movie when I got to see it in its original format, as a short film, and I was really excited to get to see what they were able to accomplish as a feature-length film, because you have a broader canvas to tell a really important story. That said, this is a really important film, but I will also say it's not the world's greatest film. There were some times where the writing, just kind of felt really wooden, and kind of almost felt like a direct-to-video kind of movie.
Well, I watched this not knowing that there was a short, and one of my thoughts right when it ended was, this feels stretched out. And so it would be really interesting to, now that I've seen this one, to see the short one and, compare what was left out versus, what was added, and the quality versus quantity, if that makes sense of that, because I agree with you. I feel like there were definitely parts where, it's like how much of it was necessary versus how much of it could we have picked up on in nuance.
Yeah, it definitely felt like they were trying to hit this intended mark, all right, we have to hit as close to 2 hours as possible. And honestly, I feel like this story could have been a lot tighter and a lot more effective had it been 90 minutes. There's so much of this story that I feel like you don't need. There's a point where we talked about this in the interview with Jaret Martino, the writer-director of this film. We'll provide a link where you guys can find that vlog. But there's a lot of music montages. And like the first time where it's like Nick and Donna that, you know, you're getting to see what their dating life was like and how innocent and sweet and like, you know, charming it was. Like I was okay with that. And then you go through another one and another one and another one. And it just felt like, how many montages am I going to have to see? And I feel like my biggest problem with this movie is the last 45 minutes of this movie. Everything past the divorce just felt really unnecessary, because it just kind of felt like I was watching air, if that makes sense. It just didn't do anything for the larger narrative. Like I thought it was really empowering the way that we're getting to see this survivor of domestic violence, you know, really chase after her goals. And it's like, it's really empowering from that angle, but I just kind of felt like you said, like it's so stretched out, but why?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you for the most part. One of the most, I think, impactful scenes for me post-divorce era would be once, you know, she starts in the classroom and there's a little girl who was the same age as she was when the movie first started. And it's that, you know, that connection that kind of establishes that butterfly effect that I was talking about in the interview, the butterfly effect of the healing versus trauma. So I thought that was a really good connection, but perhaps maybe it could have been like just kind of done a different way. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. The first eyebrow raising scene for me that was a music montage was when she was in the kitchen with her son, and, you know, she's on the phone and she's like, you know, where are you? You know, yeah, he's not home. And then her friend calls and she's like, oh, I'm going to have to call you back, like super suddenly. And I was just like, oh, like that was that. And then they start dancing in the kitchen, and I love dancing in the kitchen, but it was just, you know, a good solid 2 minutes of music montage.
Yeah, and I feel like I really think that this is an important film, because this is bringing to life, like we talked about in the interview. You did a great opening question about the use of intergenerational trauma, and, you know, I think that's something that allows this film to be as hard-hitting as it is, because you're seeing the environment that Nick grows up in, but you're also seeing the environment. I mean, one of our first opening scenes is the environment that Donna grew up in, and then you kind of see how they're breeding you know, that violence into the marriage of Donna and Nick. And I think the film does a really good job at showcasing that, and it's really important. It's just there are moments where, like, the acting comes across really wooden, or the writing kind of feels like it should be it should be a PSA and not an actual movie experience. And had this movie been something like you know, a short that you would show, or like a film that you would try and like talk at like a conference, I feel like this film's perfect for that. But it just kind of feels like the message is lost in the medium. It doesn't articulate very well to film, because of what makes a movie with the acting and the writing and the pacing and the structures. This movie doesn't really do a good job at conveying a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really noticed that really stuck out with me was when we first open up and we see again the environment that Donna grew up in. The verbal and emotional abuse isn't coming from the dad; it's coming from the mom. And then we skip over, and then we see the environment where Nick grew up, and with Nick, it's clearly the abuse, the more intimidating physical abuse of what society, I would say, in large considers to be domestic abuse, comes from the dad. And I thought that was a really interesting interconnection of exploring different ways that abuse, whether it be emotional, financial, verbal, what have you, can affect people as they grow up.
Also, I know that this movie focuses, and we spent so much of our time watching the relationship between Donna and Nick, but I would have wanted a little bit more of maybe like instead of getting all of like that post-divorce era being so stretched out, like I would have liked to explore like what happens to Donna's character, particularly like after the divorce of her parents and then into adulthood, because like that transition is so incredibly awkward, where Martino does a really good job at kind of like conveying the symbolism of how her parents fighting is like hurting her emotionally and like impacting her, where we just see 2 teardrops on like a blank page. And that is just an image that just really stuck with me really powerfully. And then the next thing we know, like she's like a young single mother. Like I would like to know kind of like where all that kind of stuff goes, or like how like the divorce of her parents and like that environment, like how it really shaped her as a young mother and as a young girlfriend to, multiple, possibly one, possibly multiple different partners.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I feel like, watching this, coming from the point of view of someone who has been in abusive relationships, like those early ones are really formative. And then we have, one that produced a child and he is not here. Like, where is the dad? He is not here anymore. Those abandonment issues can definitely like pile up and create a person who feels the need to, stay in relationships even though they're not good for them. And I absolutely 100% agree with you. I feel like there definitely could have been more character building. I mean, obviously, I immediately was emotionally attached to Donna. Like, there's no way you can't be. But I wanted more of that, of her. I agree.
Yeah, Martino does a really good job at building up Donna's character. And I really, really enjoy that. And then Kate Amston, who plays Donna, does a terrific job. Like, she is like one of the biggest highlights of this movie. Like, she is incredible in this movie.
I agree.
And
but there were some times where I'd be watching her and it's just like one of those moments where you kind of forget you're watching a movie.
I think that kind of comes back to what we were talking about with it being kind of like maybe not in the right medium, if that makes sense, because this is a movie and because they're trying to convey a social commentary and also tell a biographical story at the same time. There are moments where, especially after the film, the moment that we meet Nick, I think is really where it started for me, where I just kind of wrote down in my notes, I was like, this movie feels uncomfortably predictable. Like, Nick's a charming guy. We're gonna meet him. Something is gonna go wrong with the kid, and like it's gonna start off really subtly. And Martino does a great job at really bringing those like subtle like moments. It's not just like, oh, they got married and then he was abusive. Like he's very subtle at first, and they do a good job at it. But there comes a point where it's like, even though it's subtle, it's still predictable for me as a viewer.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed first off that I really appreciated of the subtlety of it was kind of the concept of dressing women up as objects, because like in the very beginning we have, Donna is, constantly being dressed up by her friend for like, going out, having all these like occasions. And that's something I picked up on right away. But the theme of the financial abuse kind of got, again, I feel like it's one of those things that got kind of watered down with the length of it, because I I feel like it just kind of like dropped off at the end, and it's something that was really important in the beginning with the, you know, Donna noticing Nick's house and the cars and, you know, the fancifulness of Nick as a character. And then once we kind of go into the, I would say, the trope of, you know, the gangster, like underground business boyfriend, like it just kind of fell away for me. And I would pick it up again every once in a while, like, oh yes, like the financial element is a very impactful part of this, but yeah, I would be interested to see the shorter version of this and see how they address that.
And the shorter version, I think it still packs a lot of the punch that this feature length has. It's more constricted, and that's really what I found myself at the end of the day wanting from this. So we're gonna put this on the Rorschach rating scale real quick. We're going to take a quick commercial break, come back, and we're going to talk about why this movie is so important. And even though I think we might not have fallen in the best of camps with it as viewers, I think we can both agree of its importance. So I'm going to let you go first. Rorschach rating scale 0 to 5, halves being allowed. Where does it land for you?
I would say it probably hits a solid 3 for me.
Okay. I'm going to go a little bit lower. For me, I gave this a 2.5. Again, it's a really important film, but just because of the mechanics of what makes up a movie, this one, it kind of just, it loses a lot of itself. So, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversations. This is the first time we've ever taken a commercial break in a mini episode. But the last half of this episode, we're going to possibly jump in and talk spoilers for Donna, Stronger Than Pretty. But this movie, I feel like for as much as we kind of ended on, like, it's not the greatest movie, but it's still an important movie. That comes from the fact of it being this really raw story of this couple and kind of how domestic violence and abuse really kind of finds its way in between them. And there are some really, really uncomfortable scenes to have in this movie. And I think for me, I don't know about you in particularly, was kind of the last straw for Donna, where Nick brings home another woman and she sees him. Expertly lit scene, by the way. Love it so much.
I agree.
I'm a movie nerd every once in a while. But he basically rushes up the stairs and like it's implied that he rapes her. And it is one of the most it's been a while since I've been that uncomfortable watching a movie, and I think that it really leans into the factor of why this is an important film.
I'm looking over my notes right now, and one of the things I got the most exclamation points was that scene. And I think that part of me wishes that was kind of explored more, because one of my biggest personal pet peeves with how people see domestic violence is you would be surprised how many people don't see rape in a marriage as rape, that marital rape is not a thing. And, like that being an abuse tactic in that relationship that we see between Donna and Nick, I think is just kind of one of those things that went swept under the rug. And it is a very uncomfortable topic. And going back to, yes, maybe this isn't the best movie ever. I ended this movie with the urge to tell like immediately 5 people specifically about it, because it does carry such an important story, and it has so many specific scenes like that are very impactful.
Agreed. Like, were there any particular scenes where you think are important or that stand out within the movie?
There are definitely a few. My biggest thing, and I was very excited to talk to you about this, was, did you notice in the very beginning and the very end the healing of that spaghetti?
Yeah, the bookmark. It's bookmarked really well. That's one of the things that I really enjoyed about the last half of that movie. This movie is, we talked about, like, yes, it's a lot of like dead air, but it also holds some of the most wholesome scenes in the movie. The scene where they're right before they're eating spaghetti, where they're all dancing after Donna graduates, is probably my favorite moment in this entire movie.
I agree. Yeah, it's like the first time in this movie that you can like feel that relief of happiness and joy, and that was definitely like the big tension breaker for me, was that scene.
I feel like the eating of spaghetti teases another project me and you are working on, so I'll just let that be.
Yep. But another scene that I wanted to talk to you about. How did you feel about the scene where the kids are eating with their dad at the seafood restaurant, and then it kind of like that turns into a bookmark scene too, and then like it evolves into like the vodka and the drinking? And how did you feel about that? Because I have my own personal thoughts about that.
Are you talking when they're like younger or like older? Because there's 2 different scenes where they're eating in the restaurant.
Both of them. Like it combined as sort of like a going back point, a touchstone.
To me, it kind of really illustrated a lot of the selfishness that we see Nick and go through the entire film up to that point, where he's, a married man, and he's a father, and he's a business owner, but yet he only cares about himself and like what he can get out of it. And like the scene in particular that you're talking about, where he orders all this food and he's like, yeah, they can just have whatever I'm having. Like, man, I felt so dirty and so disgusted after that point that it's like, man, I feel like it's, again, the reason why this film is so important is because typically abusive, husbands are going to be abusive fathers.
Yep.
And not really care. And I think that this film does a great job at conveying it through scenes like what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like, back in my dating days, thankfully I'm happily engaged, don't have to worry about this anymore, but back in my dating days, one of my biggest red flags was when guys would order for you. And, like, I saw that scene and just went right back to that, to those emotions of just like, oh, the audacity of ordering for someone, and especially his own children, to not have, like, the curiosity of, like, well, I've missed out, what are your favorite foods? And, yeah, so that just kind of like hit for me in a lot of ways. I thought that was a really resonating scene.
And that, like, I was really, really relieved at the scene in particular where Nick's at the bar and he's meeting with the guy that he's been hustling coke for, and he gets caught. Like, he gets talked into one more score, and it's like, then you go to that scene where Donna is kind of like just sitting via a candle with a glass of wine waiting for Nick in what was supposed to be this reset dinner for their romantic excursions, and it's so heartbreaking to see that for her, because here's a character that, I personally believe in, like, second chances. Like, I believe in grace and redemption, and I believe that, like, a person could be the scum of the earth in 1 minute and be like an angel the next, because events in life and different courses that we take and decisions we make, like, they affect us for better or for worse. And I was kind of hoping for that with Nick, but again, I think, seeing that, it didn't happen. And I think that for her, and I think maybe you can speak to this, like, for those that are in abusive situations, it always, I imagine, you think that it's going to get better, and it never does. At what point do you draw the line?
Right. And I think that's, one of the hallmark telltale signs of an abusive relationship is, what is the line? What is the red flag? And does it keep moving? And, like, I found myself many a time, knowing that what I was experiencing was abuse, like whether it be, the underbelly of abuse that a lot of people wouldn't consider abuse, or whether it be like the big red flag, tropes of Hollywood abuse. And, once you notice that line keeps moving of like, oh, I'll push one more time. Oh, it's just one more dinner. Oh, it's, like whatever. The excuses keep on coming. Once you find yourself in that situation, like, that's a big one. But, like, one of the things that I thought was really significant about the interview that we had was, a lot of the feedback. I think one of my questions was, the feedback of females versus males watching this movie, because I feel like a lot of the feedback is usually, why didn't you leave? And that's such a complicated question, and there really is never an acceptable answer to it.
No, and it's one of those things that, again, like, from someone that's just watching this as a viewer, right? Like, I don't have any direct ties in the same way that you do. I'm also looking at this movie in a completely different way, because I'm a guy. Like, I can still feel and understand the empowerment, but I think a movie like this hits differently for women. It hits differently for people that have gone through domestic abuse situations. And, it's really interesting to gauge and kind of talk about how, males or females process different things, because we all process things a bit differently. And this one, I think that, it's important because it allows a man to have that experience of abuse in a woman. And, maybe it shakes up abusers that are male that, need to kind of shine a light on what they're doing, because you're always the hero in your story, right? Like, I think that's another reason why this movie should be viewed by people. is because it really helps magnify and break the stigma around these things. And like you had said, like it really does show a wide range of abuse, whether it's financial abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's physical abuse or mental abuse. Like, you know, all of those things have scars, and you know, scars are not easy to heal. And I think we don't really get to see it as much in the movie. There's a lot of like anger, and there's a lot of like just bitterness that is still coming as a result of the fallout of divorce, as a product of, you know, split custody and so many other things that happen between Nick and Donna.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I feel like, going back to the, you know, the tightness of this film, I feel like that's something that could have been, you know, like more time could have been spent on. And I understand, like, this is, you know, his story, and, you know, like his message, going back to the interview, like his message of healing for himself, not, you know, just telling his mom's message, but his message as well. And I totally respect that. And again, like, once I get a chance, will spread this as a platform message myself. But, you know, like, just exploring those red flags, because, you know, as a woman, I've told my male friends, you know, for like a male ordering for you is micro abuse. You know, like a male at the bar pushing drinks on you when you said no, you don't want to have a drink, and they just say, "Oh, come on," that's micro abuse. And just like these micro abusive situations clearly grow. And, you know, I'm on the fence, because, you know, I feel like the story was told in a very organic way, but at the same time, you know, like, I see these things and I wish that they could be pushed more. But I guess overall, I'm very happy that this exists, and I'm happy to have viewed it.
Yes, absolutely. And you guys can find Donna Stronger Than Pretty wherever you guys get your movies digitally. And that's going to do it for us on this episode. Thank you guys for listening. But most importantly, if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. There are 130 suicides that take place as of this recording every day on American soil. And when we looked at international numbers, we discovered that there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So please, if you or someone you know is struggling, consider the resources in the descriptions wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. victimsandvillains.net/hope, where you guys can find resources including the suicide prevention hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255, or texting 741-741, or another plethora of other resources available to you guys by simply clicking that link. And you know, I think we've talked about a lot of domestic abuse. And one of the things that Jaret talked about in the interview we did with him was wanting to, you know, provide resources for domestic abuse victims as well. So if you're in that situation right now, we're going to have links in the descriptions below for you as well. I think that's going to do it. We're going to go get some coffee. You guys have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.